Hi, everyone, and welcome to Speak Up Monday. Today, I'm your host, Bhavna Parihar, and we're coming to you live from tropical Nomad, Canggu in beautiful Bali, Indonesia. So Speak Up Monday is all about inspiration. We are the #1 motivational talk show with over 1 million views. Amazing. And with the focus on social impact and entrepreneurs, both Indonesian and foreign alike, we believe that people inspire people, and that the more conversations that you have, the more perspective you gain, and the more compassionate you become. And we are now at episode 421. That's amazing. And tonight, we are discussing the trending type of workforce, remote first. Bali, and I think most places abroad, are no strangers to the entrepreneurial culture. We are used to the solopreneur journey and the remote-first companies. However, in the last couple of years, there's been such a push, kind of after COVID times. What that brought to mind was a lot of opportunities for remote-led companies, but also gaps in the corporate workforce and culture. I mean, there's no more beer cart Fridays, Thursday meetups after work with their colleagues. So how do you now connect in a non-connected industry? With that, to touch on all of this, or at least give a taster because we only have 1 hour, I am joined by Nini Fritz with a master's in communication. She is the founder of the Work Happiness Project, co-founder of iConnect and the Symbiose app. She is a passion travel enthusiast of all things pancakes and offline and connection. And she has just come off the heels of the Running Remote Conference, where she was facilitating with her special brand of offline connection for the online industry, collaborating with remote team leaders, and is here to give us a bit of an insider's view on the trends, challenges, and some of the hot topics like vulnerability that we might need to consider as we think about employment going forward. Now, before we get started, how many here in the audience have heard or participated in iConnect? Raise your hands. All right. How many of you here are either working for a remote company or a remote entrepreneur? And how many of you are maybe considering whether you want to go down the self-employed route or work for a company that supports your goals and your visions? Okay. Well, this conversation is going to cover it all because there are so much of a clash that I think comes to mind when you think corporate culture. It has this big, bad sort of stereotype to it, but there are companies who are doing really good work to try to change that, working alongside people like Nini. But with that, we have to ask ourselves also, is that the lifestyle that we want? What can we instill as remote leaders and employees to better create mental well-being and a healthy corporate culture? So with that, give it up for my guest, Nini Fritz. Okay, so I think before we dive into all the topics, I think so much of who you are and how I know you to be as a friend is your professional and your personal missions are so intertwined. So maybe just for a little bit of color for the audience, if you could take us back, how does a newly minted 30-year-old small town German end up founding a company whose mission it is to create healthy workplace environments? So maybe you could give us a little bit of take on your background and some of the moments that shaped you to get you to doing what you're doing now.
I think we could probably cover 1 hour just to sum up that story. But yeah, it actually all started after I handed in my master thesis in 2018. And that was like the time I was, like thinking of what I was going to do for the rest of my life, pretty much, to work. And I figured out I'm not ready to sit in a cubicle, so I embarked on a bucket list year. So for 1 year, I took a gap year, and I wrote like a big bucket list of things I've always wanted to see and do. And I thought by that time, when I tick off as many things as I can, I'll figure out what it is that brings me joy, what are my strengths, what are my superpowers, where do I thrive in? And then based on a year of ticking off that list, I'll get closer to figuring out what that special something is, and then I could commit to a job and an office. That's what I thought back then. So I was about 3 months into my bucket list year, and I watched a very inspiring TEDx talk from this guy called the Bucket List Guy, and he gave this perfect 12-step blueprint of how to write a meaningful bucket list that's very holistic. So not just traveling, but also people you want to meet, like things you want to learn. So I rewrote my bucket list based on that. And about 3 weeks after, I touched hands with the Dalai Lama, which was kind of the first thing on my list. And I was like, wow, if I can do that, I can put anything on that list. So I did that and ticked off a lot of things I never thought were possible. And eventually I moved to Australia, and I reached out to the guy who gave the TEDx talk and asked if I could meet him for a coffee to thank him for his inspiration and for basically giving me the trust in myself that I could do all these things. And we met up, and pretty much the day of the end of my bucket list year, he offered me a job. He was like, you're so aligned with this bucket list message, and I really wanted to basically teach what he was teaching on his TEDx talk, pretty much. So I joined the company as a bucket list coach and as a global marketing manager, working remotely. And I did really enjoy like the freedom to work from anywhere and like being so mission driven. When you just said it, like my personal and professional mission are very aligned. So I also felt like I couldn't complain about anything because I had it all. You know, it's like the freedom to work from anywhere. I was living in Australia, like could travel around, but I was actually missing some sort of human connection. Like you just sit in front of your laptop all day, and like we had occasional like team meetings, but I actually felt very lonely and like isolated. So I thought to myself, like, why do I have to choose between feeling that sense of belonging and sense of connection and working with people, or actually having the freedom to work from anywhere? So since I didn't know that job existed, I basically just created it myself. So I left my marketing role and I took this bucket list coaching license that I had, and it was my first workshop was that. So I pitched it to remote companies as a team building experience, and then that was like the first step to actually get the ball rolling and like help them to feel more connected from the inside out and like get to know each other and like also live their life truly up to the fullest. And that was kind of the stepping stone to, get the ball rolling for the Work Happiness Project and everything connection related around it. Yeah.
And so just to kind of level set us on, what year was this, would you say?
2018 was my bucket list year. And then literally on the day, like on the 365th day of the bucket list year, like the official end of this whole journey where I thought like, okay, now I should have a job, he called me. So I think that was the first time I had like experience with like manifestations and stuff. I'm like, that was like the due date I gave myself, and that day I got the call. So
in some ways, would you say that you were sort of your own beta client, kind of test product to see like, how do I show up and what am I looking for working for a company and what would I want to contribute?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm curious because I think I recall you mentioning once that you had worked with, I think, companies like Meta and Dell and whatnot. So this was a couple years ago now in the last few years. And what did you see? Because you just said that you were working for someone else. You had done this amazing bucket list year, and the fact that you kicked it off with the Dalai Lama, I mean, that's pretty aspirational for anyone. Yeah. But to have that sort of forward thinking and that mentality, and then to be in a company that sounds like it was the right fit for so many reasons, but didn't give you the human connection aspect that you're looking for. Yeah. So at that time, when you were working now in your role and offering your services, what were you seeing in companies then, like Meta, that when you were, pitching to them, what gaps were you seeing? What challenges or what presented itself from employees that you now think is changing?
I think it's very individual, so there's like no one-fits-all solution, but the trends that I see, especially for remote companies, and this can be startups and global players, but number one thing is like a lack of connection when they're fully remote, like lack of connection, which then affects like engagement, affects turnover rates. And also like if you feel less connected, you actually feel lonely, and therefore your mental health is affected. Like isolation, loneliness leads to depression, decreased performance. So all of that just creates a ripple effect.
And doesn't it seem, I think it would seem pretty intuitive to most people that if it's a happier employee, a healthier employee, they're going to be that much more productive, hence better, retention rates and just in terms of just overall employee and client engagement. Yet companies still fall short of figuring out how to provide that. And I think I read a stat somewhere that 95% of individuals are looking at the corporate culture as a means to whether they work with the company as opposed to compensation. And that's a pretty astounding number. So and you've just come off of this conference. So the fact that there are still these challenges presenting themselves, how, outside of the typical, okay, you can do like a virtual chat room, what did some of these sort of offline meetups look like?
I would say intentionality is everything. It's like you can spend like thousands or millions of dollars in like an offsite or like a company meetup, but if it's not created with intention, your money's just going to waste pretty much. So I think for that specifically, the Running Remote conference was a lot of insights about the latest trends and challenges of remote work. And one of the biggest one is actually setting up these offsites for their own teams. So what we did as like an industry, as a community, like getting all the leaders together for the Running Remote conference, that's kind of what they're doing with their team. And yeah, there are a lot of things that can go right, but a lot of things that can go wrong. And since I would say like the remote working world is just such a like new thing, we're still in the figuring out phase. Like we're still in like running all these studies about best practices, because there are no real like long-term studies done in terms of like connection and like how it affects productivity and stuff. We have studies, we have short-term studies, but I think that's a challenge in the first place. And yeah.
And because I'm just thinking about, if you look at the landscape of the last couple of years, so let's take it from, 2020, so like COVID times. So you had companies that were largely in office, transitioning to a hybrid environment, and then a full-time remote environment. Now there's a push to be bringing these people back into the office, return to office. And I'm hearing, different sort of viewpoints on some who say, well, we're a lot more productive. Working remotely, working from home. We're not having to factor in commuting. And then there's obviously, some corporate companies that have to pay the bills in terms of keeping, the lights on in the offices that they've acquired, and so they're pushing to have people in. So when you have that hybrid, how does that translate? Because now you have some who, maybe they have to sign up for the online retreat that they do as a company. But how do you sort of mitigate between that world, that corporate culture has such a negative connotation?
I'd say the major difference is truly like whether they're remote first or whether like COVID made them go remote. I think this is like a huge differentiation from the get-go.
So can you kind of define, just for anyone who's tuning in and who's maybe considering remote work, because I think that is such a generalist term, because remote work can be someone who works for themselves, works from home, but not all companies lead with that. So if you could just explain a little bit for the audience the key difference between being remote first and just being remote.
And there's also like a lot of separations in between that. So we have remote first, remote only, hybrid, like fully office, and then there are a few variations in between that. So remote first is basically like really a company culture that was set up from the very beginning, that they don't have an office. So, with hybrid companies, they still have offices in different cities. Remote first, they don't. They run all like the tools online, and they set up like an intentional company culture remote from the beginning. So the difference to like companies that actually have been going remote through like COVID, they learned how to adapt like to the technical devices and like integrating whatever Slack and Zoom and like taking basically their office online. So that worked. But I think 66% of like CEOs actually complained that was like the number one challenge for them during COVID, is like keeping up the company culture, because they didn't have the systems in place for that. Like they just expect company culture to happen naturally when people like bump into each other at the water cooler, like share their lunch break, and like 2 minutes before the meeting, they chat about the latest like TV show or like their kids. And if you go like fully remote, you don't have that. Like all you talk about is work. When you log into Zoom, like everyone's got their camera off, like it's muted until the meeting starts. and then you have an agenda. Like sometimes people don't even turn their camera on, like you don't see their faces, you don't hear their voice, so it feels very disconnected. And then you don't intentionally create this company culture because it's just expected to happen naturally, and then somehow you forget while you're so busy trying to like keep the business up and running, especially with all the challenges that COVID brought anyway. Like culture was the first thing that fell off because people just didn't know how to create online connections, and like people got zoomed out. So they were just, that was like a trend, and like a trending word.
Zoomed out, I love that.
Zoomed out. It was like they were just tired of sitting in front of their laptop. Like they were not keen for like social happy hours and another trivia session or something. So they were like losing people because they were not connected really to the company, like values, the mission, the interconnectedness, also like the cross-departmental connectedness that just wasn't really happening. And I think the difference to a remote first company is like they implement that in their like building blocks of the company. Like ideally they create like a culture playbook from the beginning. So employees who like onboard, they know exactly what's expected of them. So this is how we communicate. This is like, do we have async or sync communication? Do we like attend meetings? Do we record them on Loom? Like, sometimes they even have like emotional, like emojis behind their Slack name to like check in with like how they're feeling today, because you don't come to the office and be like, oh, I had a shit day. Like, it becomes more human centered. And the next level of like remote first is actually people first. So you can have that in office as well, but like a lot of companies also build their company culture around like people-centered, people-first metrics, and then based on that, really create the company culture. And studies have shown that they have like the lowest turnover rates. Like I just talked to someone at Running Remote who's been running the company for, I don't know, I think 6 years or so. They had 6 people leaving in that time, and they have an incredible company culture. So of course, like, it's like a relationship. If you feel like nurtured, if you feel safe to like be yourself, to express yourself, if you feel connected to the company's mission, like there's no reason to look for another company.
So it's interesting to say that, because I'm thinking, I think for the vast majority of people, and maybe not so much, I think, in Bali, because we do have some people who do work remotely and have their own businesses, but I'm thinking of those who are tuning in online, or just the general people who are coming out of school and graduating. There has been this, ongoing sort of debate and dialogue of having it on the extremes, right? Yeah. Either it's the lifestyle that a lot of people tote on TikTok and social media is, working for yourself and, living for your own dream and being that solopreneur, self-employed. And while that's wonderful, then on the other hand, there is that corporate matrix. How awful is that? And, they're slaving 9 to 5. So this idea that there's this like kind of sweet spot in between, because not everyone necessarily wants to be a solopreneur or be self-employed, And I think I talk to many people just in my own network where sometimes they don't have that option, and there is this perceived sense of instability when you work for yourself. And I'm not saying that is correct, but then there is this perceived sense of security working for a company. But then it's that, but then I'm selling my devil, to work for them. Yeah. So this in-between of those who are like, maybe solopreneur, self-employment's not for me just yet. Yeah. And I really, really want to have the perceived stability, security of a company, but a company that, in your words, is people-centric, remote first. What would you say are like maybe some of the top 3 things that they do and that you help them do, so that someone can identify what to look for? Yeah.
It's a really, really good point you made, because I feel like, especially on Instagram, it always looks like the dream, like, working with your laptop from like some tropical island, and you just work like, 4 hours a week, like Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week, and like being this thriving entrepreneur. And like, people in Bali probably know reality looks different. Like that's just not. If you're lucky and if you like spend a lot of time in like building that business, you come to that point. But solopreneurship comes with its fair share of like challenges and tests and stuff. And so I believe you actually like hit the jackpot if you work for like an amazing remote company who's people first centered and like allows you the flexibility, allows you like the freedom to work from anywhere, and they like genuinely believe that you can perform your best work when you're working from a place, from an environment that just fills you up from the inside out, where you feel like you can bring your best self to work because you can make your own working hours. You can like cook lunch for your children in between, or you can like, you know, work from the beach or from the mountains. So I do believe like amazing company cultures really have that as a first like priority to make sure that flexibility is being offered, and they also really care about their employees' like growth and personal development. So they offer actually really amazing employee benefits. So I collaborated with companies that made me consider changing from like doing my own thing to basically telling them.
So you're now that oxymoron that's like, maybe I'm going to go in that direction.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not totally like against it. Like, I love what I do and I love like tapping into different company cultures. But I also do believe that when I find like that one company culture that I think like really aligns with like what I do and who I am, like I love the idea of like having some sort of like safety and security provided by a company who like is not just doing that because they want to save money on rent. You know, it's like they're not remote first because they don't want to pay for office spaces, and they, you know, get more money for themselves if they just tell people like you can work from home, you know?
So, I mean, I think that, you know, the notion around, you know, we keep saying like if they value flexibility, they value growth, but let's take it down like a bit brass tacks. Like what does, so in your work that you do, you're interacting with these teams, you're getting kind of a view into what their week tends to look like. Because whether you're a potential employee seeking to work with a remote company, or you're a remote team leader, or you're at that, you know, sort of sweet spot where you're now going to maybe grow your team from 1 to 2 people, and it's less now about having that one-on-one connection that they get to now growth. If you had to almost provide like a sneak peek into what that playbook looks like, what someone could take away, whether they're leading a remote team or building a remote company, or the employee who's going to be partaking, can you give some examples of what those initiatives look like and why they're valuable?
Yeah, really good point you made also, to like change from this startup mentality where you still have like, let's say 5 to 10 people and everyone can connect on an individual level. But if you then, like the company is growing fast, like you lose that individual connection among team members. So therefore it's like super important to have like some sort of like cultural playbook in place so everybody knows exactly what to expect. So first thing I would say is like transparent communication, because a lot of like information can get lost for like remote teams, and also especially for hybrid teams, because some people like participate in the meeting and like the office, and then others like trying to zoom in online, so they might miss out on valuable information. So I think that one is number one, like transparent communication. Also feedback. I think feedback plus good level of like communication in the sense of how feedback is being provided. Because we all, especially when we collaborate with like different cultures, we do have different communication styles. Like I'm German, and like Germans, they're not known to like sugarcoat things. You know, they're like pretty straightforward, they're pretty direct. And this can be rough for like, I don't know, like Americans, for instance, or like someone from a Hispanic culture who are like a very like emotional and like enthusiastic. So it's very important to integrate that in the playbook as well, or like to have like, you know, an open conversation about the different communication styles. And also, what I always advise the companies that I work with is leave room for vulnerability and place to like personally express themselves. Like some Slack channels that are completely non-work related, where they can share like their little wins of the day, like anything that you would tell someone in the office, but it's not really worth like dropping anywhere like in like a work related Slack feed, but anything that really like boosts that human connection, like the micro things, you know?
So actually just on that, I'm curious, because I think we all know, or we would assume that vulnerability exists, you know, in the workforce, but how does it or how have you learned that it presents itself in remote teams? And, is this something that was coming up at the conference because you have all these leaders coming together, probably, sharing a bit of their war stories, so to speak? And what are some of the fears? Vulnerability, what does that look like, and what can be done to mitigate that? Because how do you, I'm just thinking about myself, like if I'm behind a laptop, I don't know that I want to connect with Susie over there on the other side of the screen about what's going on in my day, and I'm not necessarily going to feel comfortable. But if you're coming in and having to instill that, maybe provide some examples of what vulnerability in the remote first workplace can look like, and some of the other fears that were coming up that we can look to mitigate.
Honestly, I don't know if I'm biased or if that's like selective reality, because that's one of my like core themes. And I was like facilitating a workshop on vulnerability at the conference. But I felt like I heard it everywhere, like in a lot of like different like culture-related themes or like talks and panels. Vulnerability came up over and over again, because I think there's a misconception about vulnerability that it's considered a weakness. But actually, I think vulnerability is really like about daring greatly and like taking like an emotional risk or like emotional exposure. And based on that, you actually allow people to connect more deeply with yourself. I think in the working world, and then also like normally like in the social environments, people are so busy like trying to impress others with their achievements, or like in the work context, like you just want to pretend you have it all together, and like people often don't dare to ask questions because they feel stupid, or they feel like everyone gets it and I don't, so I feel stupid to ask, or like afraid to like underperform if they ask a stupid question. But it actually takes, first of all, it takes so much cognitive energy to like cover up pretending you know something that you don't, or like people get snappy because they feel like triggered when they get like when they're being caught for like covering up their vulnerability. So it actually creates a lot of like obstacles if you're not being vulnerable. Plus, it's a super glue for connection. If you, it's actually like the moment where we feel like we let someone see through the cracks and like share like this human side of us. And so often in the workplace, we just have this like 2D human doing on that we're like, oh, you're the, like we know their name, we know their nationality, and we know like the role they're playing, like the marketing guy, this is the accounting woman, but we don't know anything behind that two-dimensional like mask that they put on. But I think vulnerability is kind of like tapping into this three-dimensional sphere where you have like feelings, where you have insecurities, but also like, yeah, you have interests, you have dreams, and like you share that with someone, and then suddenly you kind of enter another dimension, and then you feel this connection.
So then would you say, because I think all of us can attest to the value of that, but now getting not only the company, so if it's a remote first company, they've probably already identified that, hey, we need to somehow integrate this into our systems. And so then it's about how do we get the employees to actually want to show up to this without it feeling like the forced thing that maybe some of the non-remote first companies would do, where they would mandate that Friday everyone gets on Zoom and has their coffee together. So I think there is that nuance of integrating it, but then actually empowering and in how to actually get them on board with that. And now, is that where roles like head of culture or facilitators come to play, like companies who do that? Because how much of it is that work has to come in as almost like an independent consultant to kind of help do that?
First and foremost, I would actually say it sprinkles down from the top. So if the leader is being vulnerable and like creating a space where employees feel like safe to be themselves and express themselves, it's getting easier, and that people feel like they dare to open up. So I think, shameless self-promotion, getting external facilitators on is great. But I think it really needs to start with the leader first. And they have to lead by example, to be vulnerable, to also like share that they're not perfect. Although they're like the CEO and they founded the companies, they're still like a human being. And then there are also like really cool like tools like Slack integrated apps, or like softwares, like one is called Managing Happiness, another one is Hoogly, that really is kind of like a mental health tent, kind of like a virtual like mental health center where like employees can connect with each other. They get like a question of the day, do like a mental health check-in, and they can also like, you know, get like a professional consultant to help. Sometimes it's AI, you know, but it's like really like companies are proactively doing something to care about mental health, because first, I hope they care about their employees to be like healthy and like feel good. But also, if you look at all like the statistics and like the costs that companies end up paying for like mentally unbalanced or like disengaged or like disconnected employees, like in the end, it like falls back onto them. It's like they pay for it.
So how does, because you mentioned AI as well, and I imagine that's probably came up at the conference as well, because now you're looking at technology to create connection in an online environment. So maybe elaborate a little bit on what that looks like, or what trends you guys are seeing, and how that's being integrated. Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it because I know it has its fair share of like risks and challenges. But the eternal optimist in me is like using AI as actually like as a boost for human connection. You know, I think it doesn't have to replace it. So it's not that we're just talking to a robot all day and like we don't get like advice from our friends, or like we don't use our brains anymore. We can actually use the benefits of AI to like personalize things. You know, to like use it to. For instance, when it comes to company culture, like I'm like a consultant or like advisor for CultureBot. That's a Slack integration app that basically like sends out mental health tips. You know, it's like based on whatever you put out there. They analyze your profile and then they send you like a reminder of like you should go and take a walk. Or, you know, like you've been working for like, I don't know, 4 hours without a break. Go take a coffee break. Like they track your data, but also like it actually helps you to, boost your mental health because you wouldn't do it. Or like send personalized reminders for, let's say, work anniversaries, birthdays, whatever. It's like things that you don't have to think about anymore. Like AI actually helps you to do the heavy lifting, and you just bring a little bit of like the human component to it. So I think in many ways we can actually use it to boost human connection and just let it do the things that would require a lot of like cognitive energy for us, and let AI do that, and we just take care of like the last part is actually connecting with humans. And they're like, don't even know where to start. There's so many. Like if anyone's interested, I can like just send you a list of like apps and tools and softwares that you can integrate that do exactly that.
Yeah, I think that's a key point too, because I mean, I think we just want to instill that you're not in the business of helping people figure out what type of remote work to do. We know other people for that. Yeah. You're in the business of collaborating with companies and leaders and teams to instill corporate well-being, mental well-being through the offline connections that you make in the online world. And so with that being said, when you were at Running Remote and you're at the conference, so what were maybe some of the trends you were seeing, if there was maybe like 2 or 3, as people are maybe transitioning away from that corporate culture having that negative tone? What are some of the trends you're seeing for the future of remote work, given all of these things?
So the theme of the conference was actually the future of like distributed work. So not necessarily remote only. I think it's just important to mention that we don't have to glorify the term of like remote. You know, it's not everyone's dream, and it's not like the ultimate perfection. It's the point here is more about flexibility. You know, like if they want to go to the office, like if they have like a hybrid like setup, let them go to the office because maybe they're extroverts and like they love to be around people. You know, it's not that it's the one-fits-all solution for everyone, but make it flexible. Like really create workplaces where people thrive, where people like create this psychological safety, where people feel like they can show up as their full selves to work. That includes like inclusivity, like not just, it's like every race, every like sexual orientation. Also, people with disabilities. You know, they cannot commute for like 1.5 hours a day to sit like in a metro to like go through a busy city and go to an office. So that is also some sort of inclusivity that is being provided by remote work. Another thing about flexibility is like this async or sync meetings. So, like you can create your own working hours. And a lot of it, that would probably be my second point, is like trust by default. Because I think a lot of like companies, and that's why this whole like return to office debate is like so high up. Companies don't trust their employees to get work done when they're not being like the big brother observing what they're doing. But I mean, that came out at the conference that people are actually much more productive if they can work to their own terms, if they work like in an environment where they feel like they can bring their best selves to work and they can schedule kind of their work around their life and not their life around their work. So when they show up, they're like present, they're like switched on, they're balanced, and they're much more productive. They're more innovative, they're more creative, they're more like they're better at like making decisions and like solving problems because they can go for a run in their break, or like they can spend time with like family around them, and they don't have to like commute to the office for like 3 hours a day, or spend like, I think, what is it, like $50 a day for anyone who like works from an office, just because they pay for fuel, they pay for parking ticket, for lunch. Like, imagine all of that can be reinvested in yourself.
What are the risks? Because with that whole return, like I said, I think that's maybe more indicative of what we're seeing outside of Bali and things like that, where you have this return to work and now
to office.
Return to office, sorry, return to work. Clearly you can tell I'm on a tropical island. Return to office, and now if they aren't allowing for that, or actually my question would actually be is, what risks are they facing outside of obviously, quitting, low productivity, but what is the trend then? Like, how can a corporate culture that is already, as you said, they weren't remote first, they weren't people first, but maybe it's an environment like a big financial institution, right? That for security reasons, tax reasons, has to have their employees in office based there. Outside of what may be termed the cheesy, offline connections that happen when they do like the virtual meetups, what are the things that they could be doing, or that you guys were discussing at the conference as a way to transition these sort of more old school corporate culture environments when they have maybe mandates that they have to have people in the office 3 days a week, as compared to the more flexible remote first companies that are, so like what are some things that you guys talked about at the conference that lend itself to that?
Honestly, I wish I had a better answer to that, but I would say the conference was like specifically for companies that run somehow in the industry of like it is possible to work remotely. So I mean, of course, if you work like in the healthcare sector, like you cannot do surgery remote. Like that just doesn't work. So we have to be aware that like, and I'm so grateful that exists, but there's certain industries that can be remote, and I think the whole debate is more around that, like people who have the option to work flexible hours, and then they're being called back to the office, although it had been proven that it works when they're not working from the office. So I think that the whole debate is more about like, prove me wrong, like it's more the lack of trust. So I think I don't really have like an appropriate answer for these kind of sectors because it is necessary, and I'm grateful that people do it. I think, it's like if everybody in the world wanted to go remote, like the system would collapse. Like
So, and that makes a lot of sense, because I think is like we know there's certain systems, society, and just things that are like intrinsic to how we run. So it's more about if you are a company or you're a leader or you're an employee that's already been working in an environment that has supported remote work, how can we do better? What are the things that we need to look out for going forward? Is there a risk that someone who becomes self-employed and solopreneurs? So like if we're in that sweet spot, it's within the remote first environment, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways that you took away from that then?
I think I think it's just the key if you want to attract and retain top talent, especially like the next generation or like current generation onboarding on the workforce, Generation Z. Like they're so focused on self-fulfillment, work-life balance, making an impact, like 4-hour work week, like all of that. Like, and in the working environment that we are now, like so many of like the old leaders are leaving. So actually we cannot fill all these jobs. So the tables have turned that now the new employees can actually create their own work conditions, and then companies, they have to do like the peacock dance to like get them in. Like they can basically choose their benefits or like set their demands, and then like companies have to live up to that if they actually just want to get the best of the best people. And then I think companies just lose people if they don't allow them flexibility. Like if they force them to come to the office, like they miss out on the best people, because they, what you said earlier, it's like 95% of people actually the first thing they do is like they look for a great company culture that offers like remote working options, like employee benefits and stuff. If you don't provide that, you end up with like the people that nobody wants, and then that impacts your business.
And so would you say, like, have there been trends around pensions and sort of insurance and things like that, which I think previously when one worked for themselves or was a freelancer company, you didn't have that? And that was some of the security that came with working for a company. Are there, like, have you heard any sort of shifts around allowing for that in remote first companies? Yeah,
I think that's like the biggest challenge for remote companies, if they have like a global talent pool to hire from, is like, what's the whole liability behind it? You know, how can we set that up like legally, like when it comes to insurance, when it comes to taxes, when it comes to like also salary, you know? It's like, of course, they're doing the same job, but they might not get paid the same because like one has like a lower cost of living in their country than somebody who lives like in Australia, but they have like the same qualifications. So how do you justify that? So I can go into the specifics, but that would probably take another hour. But there are tools and like companies in place that actually focus on that, like global payroll, like switching. Let's say if you work for a company that doesn't have these systems in place and you want to go remote, you could switch to becoming a contractor. You know, you don't have to be like insured by the company. It's like you're still doing the work you're doing for them, but instead of being hired as an employee, you just become a contractor. So there are loopholes to like go remote, even if your company isn't a remote first, but they want to keep you.
It sounds like there's a lot of opportunities actually in the landscape. Like I'm just thinking about, the people that we have here, idea makers, apps, developers, how can they support these remote first companies to allow for those things? And obviously I think there'll be like changes in legislation and taxes, and that's like a bigger conversation.
Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, so there's a movement towards that. But on that note, I actually want to give an opportunity, because the whole point, as we talked about, is having these offline connections, and you help cultivate that. And we have an offline audience here. And what better way to connect than to allow for some Q&A with the audience. So with that, I just want to give a moment for any questions that you guys all might have for Nini. Mike.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Nini. Wonderful to see you again. Great energy. And Bhavna, you're awesome. Welcome back. So the question that comes up for me is, obviously there's a few people here in a few different roles, and you're saying about that there's a number of different ways to interact, right, on a remote scale, right? So for you personally, what was the most difficult aspect of this changing from the predictable world of working with a company to kind of becoming a self-employed person?
Good question. Talking about vulnerability here. So I think, it's an ongoing journey. They say like new level, new devil. So like the more you grow and like the more you elevate, like you face new challenges. I think the biggest challenge in the work that I'm doing is like I'm doing like culture building and like hosting workshops for remote companies and offsites and stuff. But I think the biggest challenge I'm facing is the consistency. Sometimes you have like thriving month and you feel like I totally cracked it. This whole like working smarter, not harder is like totally paying off. And then other month, it's rather quiet, and you're like, how do I do life? It's like you're trying to make sure like your ego stays detached from that, or like your self-value is not identified by like the amount of like money you make every month. But I think that's the biggest challenge. Sometimes you feel like you're thriving, other times you feel like you're surviving, and you don't have this safety net to fall back on. So I think in that case, it's just so important to do it, like to have a powerful why, to like always connect with like the intention of why you're doing the work that you're doing. Because I feel like that's kind of like an infinite energy resource to keep you going. But if you disconnect it from that and like you're just doing it because you think like one day it's gonna make like, it's gonna rain money on you because it's a great idea and like it's needed in the market, but it's not like your soul's purpose, I think it's much harder to keep up the motivation to keep on going and like push through the challenging days.
And then on that, I'm sure there's someone else here who has a question like Detlef or someone. I can tell you got a question, mate. I've given you literally 2 minutes to figure out what that question is. So on that mentality, right? So you're saying that, yeah, right, some months incredible, feel like you've cracked it.
Yeah.
Then you mentioned about, not having your ego be involved,
Yeah.
right? You mentioned about, tapping into your why as a way to kind of, I guess, protect you from the devils of the darkness, right? Coming to get you. So then, what is your why? What's your soul's purpose, if you don't mind sharing it with us? And then how do you use that in reality? Maybe give us an example. How did you use that in reality to kind of get you past that?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lean month. Yeah.
I think my purpose is really to connect people and like share positivity, like with everyone I encounter, like leave a spark of positivity in their life for their own lives, like just really inspire them to make the most out of their time, like live a fulfilling life. And because we do spend 2/3 of our waking hours at work, I thought it's the smartest thing to just, start working with companies to implement like more happiness at the workplace. Plus they have a budget for that. Like maybe individuals wouldn't really want to like invest in themselves, or like they have other priorities to spend their money on. But I think it's so much needed to like, feel more supercharged from the inside out, to like wake up with a beautiful mindset, getting excited about life, getting excited about the day. And like, if I have any opportunity to like reach people like on like a bigger scale or like large audiences, that's what I want to do. So for me, I really measure my success more in like how many lives can I impact, and not like, and the money is a side effect of that, because that means like the more workshops and like the more teams I collaborate with, the more lives I've impacted. So that keeps me going.
Wonderful. So Detlef, are you ready? He's not ready yet. Come on, mate. He's ready. All right. So while he's getting ready, last question is: so if someone was going to move from paid employment with a company and moving into remote first, maybe if there are 3 things that you could advise them to prepare now, right? What would they be?
So first thing I would say, like, it depends if they want to be like hired by a company or they want to be a solopreneur and do their own thing. So it's not what I did, but that's what I would advise to do. It's like, don't quit your day job and like go all in, It's like, build it up as a side business, like do like maybe 2 hours a day, ideally before work, because in the morning you got your best energy. So I would advise like use that best energy to work on your own projects, and then show up to work with your 80%, but give your 100% to yourself and not like the 20% that like the rest of your battery. And then once you start developing an income from that, like then build up on that. But like I did that, but I've learned my lesson. So I probably would say like, don't just leave that behind and start from scratch. Number 2 is, I'm biased, but connections are everything. So I do a lot of like networking on LinkedIn, and I love it. Like I do a lot of like virtual coffees, not necessarily with the intention to sell something, but more to like get inspired, like hear people's stories, like learn from them, or like sometimes it leads to like a podcast or like to like a LinkedIn live session. And I think that's super valuable. And for me, that was the beauty of going to running remote, to like see that all these like individual, like virtual coffees that I spend like literally hundreds of hours networking with people online that I've never seen, I've never met, coming to the conference and be like, I feel home. Like, these are my people. Those people get me. Like, they have these professional ambitions to like do something like higher, meaningful, but also they want to be free and like live life on their own terms. So yeah, I think sometimes, you know, you get like a mentor out of it, an advisor, a friend, probably had dates. But yeah, networking helps a lot. Very honest answer.
By the way, did you hear about the dating one?
Something. No, okay, make it even easier. So if somebody, not me, but if somebody is in Bali, want to start remote working, I mean, how does he start that? I mean, is there a platform, or is it LinkedIn, or? And second question, what kind of companies hiring?
Yeah. Okay, I start with the first question. So, as Bhavna said as well, it's like, I wish I could just serve remote jobs on a plate, but I don't. So generally, I would say look for remote job boards and be clear on what you want to do. Like, don't just look for a remote job because you like the idea of like working from anywhere. It's like, ideally, you should be aware of like your strength and like what you want to do, because they can pick up on that. Like, if you're in an interview and be like, I do anything to work remotely, like, it's kind of a restaurant that just offers Mexican, Indian, and Chinese, but is not like an expert in anything. So be clear on what your field of expertise is, and then look at remote job boards. There are plenty of like remote job platforms, like Flex Jobs, peoplefirstjobs.com, what's that? The other one, Go Remotely, or like Grow Remote, all of that. So I can send you a list. Actually, I do have the list from the Running Remote conference, but like remote first job boards. And make sure it's a validated remote job, because I feel a lot of companies put it out as remote first, but it's a trap. Like, you still have to come to the office like once a week, you know, and like, great, I can work 4 days from anywhere, but that means like you cannot move to Bali and like be here when you have to go to the office, even for like a day a week. So yeah, and then, I mean, I love it. Maybe that's not everyone's cup of tea, but work from a co-working space. Like, if you want to find a job or want to network, like, hang out where remote workers hang out. Like, when
Tropical
beautiful
Nomad.
Tropical Nomad. Product placement. But yeah, surround yourself with people who are already doing what you want to do, and then they can help you out. They can lift you up. They maybe know someone their company might hire. So coming back to connecting with people. So yeah, that would be my answer to the question number one. Question number two, which companies hire me? Honestly, I would say I'm fortunate to work with companies who do have this people-first mindset. I've never worked with a company that I felt like their company culture is complete crap and I have to go in and fix it. It's more that they already have this mentality of like, we care about our team. Like, we just want to make sure they're like thriving, and we want to like make sure they're like holistically fulfilled and like have like a strong focus on well-being at work. And yeah, like I do a lot of like podcasts and LinkedIn outreach. So I think my niche is very specific for like workplace happiness. And that's how they find me. Plus, I do a lot of like networking and partnerships with like corporate wellness platforms, team building companies, like offsite platforms. And then like my workshops are being listed. So anyone who like resonates with that, reaches out. And then these are the companies that I work with. And honestly, it's a very broad spectrum. I wouldn't even say it's industry specific, so I couldn't pinpoint if it's like education, like pharma or tech. It's everything, starting from startups to global players. Like, I've worked with Facebook and Dell, but I've also worked with like small non-for-profit companies. So there's actually like not even a specific niche that I could address. Just anyone who actually cares about their people. And I'm fortunate that these are a lot of companies out there with great company cultures.
So you can recommend it for newcomers to say, okay, that's what I start now in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I want to hear.
Yes, I highly recommend. But also, I have to say, it's not for everyone. Like, sometimes I feel like we're selling the dream that being like an independent solopreneur living in Bali is like as high as it can get on the Nomad hierarchy. But it has to be your thing. Like, some people don't like being far away from their family. Some people need the safety and security of having a consistent income, or they just love going to the office and they're extroverts. They want to hang out with their coworkers and share their little wins in person. So it has to be your thing. There's no one fits all. So it's for me, but it's maybe not for everyone watching or being here in the audience.
No, it was interesting to hear from you at the beginning. I was not aware about this, but there's also certain loneliness. So the higher you climb in the individualization thing, the higher the risk that you get also pretty lonesome. And that was very nice to hear that there's...
Especially when you're like a people's person who's like picking up on like thriving from getting energy from the people around you, and then suddenly... you sit in front of your laptop all day and like got your headphones on, even in a co-working space, like you're surrounded by people, but hand on the heart, we're not talking to people. Everyone is just diving into their own work, like listening to music or like having calls and stuff, but there's not that much interconnectedness. So I think that also affects our performance at work. If our social batteries aren't full, we might not perform our best at work. So I think it's important to consider when you're working remotely to like make sure you still fill your social cup as well.
Right. Otherwise, we have a lot of dogs in Bali.
Just very quickly, if we can publish the lists on the follow-up after this so people have access to it, that would be great. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you for that. And I was actually, when you mentioned, thank you for that question about the loneliness in the beginning. And you also mentioned that when it comes to vulnerability and loneliness, it is like a top-down approach. Yeah. So I know we're kind of coming up to the end of this, and I just wanted to kind of get a thought from you, or be left with a thought of what does a leader like that look like? Knowing that many of us are building companies, or as you said, are figuring out, as you said, like kind of new to the market. What does a leader being vulnerable look like in terms of how that they present themselves to their workforce, so that we can look for that or embody that in our teams?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't want to just spit out an answer that I haven't thoughtfully thought about. But I think it comes back to what I said earlier, between this shift from like this 2D human doing to becoming a 3D human being. Like,
wait, say that again. So a 2D human doing becoming a 3D human being.
Yes.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that?
I would say, especially as a leader, people always think they have to be perfect and they cannot admit that they like fucked up, But I think if they actually admit it, it makes them more human. Like, that really like allows their team to also embrace that and like admit when they didn't understand something, when they made a mistake. Like, it really creates this safe place to express themselves and feel like there's like a judgment-free work environment where they can like show up to work even when they're having a bad day, or like and I think as a leader, that's also fine. Like, it's a fine line between showing up as your full self, but then also there's some like privacy. You don't have to tell everyone everything at work, But I think this creating this psychological safety and embracing your own flaws and mistakes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to just leave with one thought, and then allow you an opportunity to also share some closing remarks. On that note, when coming from the conference, and everyone that you interacted with, and sort of these companies that are remote first and doing it right, so to speak, if you could share, if you're aware of an example of, you don't have to mention the company's name, but a company that is in which way they are doing it right. So when you've gone in and facilitated with the teams, what you're hearing from the employees when they're interacting in these offline connections that you're creating, what is the chatter amongst them from a company that is doing it a way that we can look to embody without, I know you can't mention names.
I'm happy to mention names because I feel like they deserve a shout out for doing something like extremely right. So the first one I would mention is MailerLite. MailerLite. I met the founder, incredible woman, like really cool woman. Ilma Tiki is her name. She sold the business for like 90 million, and I don't know, I think she built it in like a decade or something. And what they do, they have a joy budget for their employees, and I love that. So instead of just giving them money to invest in like any like training development that is meant for like professional growth, employees basically just have to come up with a story why investing it in like whatever they want to do would bring them joy. And then the company, if they 99% of the time it's like the case that they're like legitimate, approved, so they can spend it on a yoga retreat, they can spend it on like, I don't know, a graffiti course. There's been crazy stories, but like they spend their money on. But if it brings them joy and happiness, it only has to make sense to them. But they're like, we invest in that. We want you to like feel joy. We want you to feel seen as like holy as you are, and not just because you want to pick up another like tech related skill to become better at your job. And then they have like this Slack channel where everyone's like posting pictures and sharing stories, which is such a boost for the company culture, like to create this connectedness as well. So that was like one of my favorite examples, and also just her as like a human who's so in integrity to like kicking ass in like life and work, I would say. Second one is Discourse. So I also met the Discourse. And that's like basically like a remote communication tool. And I've also luckily had like a one-on-one with the founder, Sarah Hawk. And they're really big in like creating a culture of like transparency and vulnerability. So they have like check-in questions every week, like very vulnerable questions that people have to answer. There's a lot of like engagement within these like, I mean, they use their own communication channel like Discourse, but there's a lot of engagement among the team members to like praise and cherish each other and like celebrate each other's wins, or like share compassion when like they're having a rough day. And like I think that really like lets them grow together as a team. And like that's why they have that's actually a company I've mentioned with like the 6 people who quit in like I don't know how many years. So they have a very, very low turnover rate. And number 3 is Doist. I think Doist. I think they're very well known in terms of having like an incredible company culture, like remote company culture, and they've been remote first from the get-go. And I've also had the fortune to facilitate their Doist Connect, like their annual retreat in Italy last year. And they're just the coolest company. Like honestly, what they do for like employee benefits, like every month they have a budget for like snacks, for gym, for like a co-working space. They pay for like employees meeting up in a city and like going to a concert together. Or like they really basically spend the money that they don't spend on an office, which is read a number somewhere, $11,000 per employee per year. And they basically just reinvest around like $10,000 per employee, like in their people. You know, they just provide those benefits. So they're just repurposing what they're not spending on like the office space, and like creating like incredible retreats, mini retreats for the teams, leadership retreats for like the executives, and then also like the annual company retreat for everyone to get together. And they're like fine tuning it every year to like really like implement the feedback that they get. And it's all about just connecting people, coming together offline. And that really boosts connection. I think he said it in the talk, like 27% connection increase, just from one retreat that lasts for like at least 6 months. So yeah, I think they're just all like leading examples that remote works. And if you create a company culture with an intentionality, it can actually outperform every in-office company culture, and people are like here to stay, and you create like happier, healthier employees that perform as their best selves, and in the end that comes back to you as a company.
Thank you. So now so it's interesting because I think I just want to touch on, so we've talked about vulnerability, the idea of transparency as leaders and employees. The fact that there was a bit of a rethinking, which I thought was really interesting, about the typical budget that maybe gets given for massages and physiotherapy and all that, like rethinking what that budget could look like when you don't have people in the office. And the idea that it's, aligning with sort of the trends of society right now, where we have the Gen Z culture and a lot of sort of the younger millennials who are really valuing mental well-being, work-life balance, and sort of looking to them and the way in which they're functioning, and to building your company around some of those motivations. And I think that sort of then upends our debate, where it's not so much of a corporate culture clash. It's about creating like a corporate connected culture, and therefore no clash. So thank you so much for that. And actually, on that note, you've been tooting the horn for a couple other companies. I believe if you initially were talking a little bit about, you have the Work Happiness Project, but then you also have iConnect and Symbiose. So what can you elaborate a little bit on what they're about, and how, if someone wants to get involved, what that would look like?
So in the end, they all come back to connecting people. So the Work Happiness Project is all about like connecting teams online. So the tagline is work from anywhere, feel connected with everyone. And it really has like a focus on holistic well-being. So they're either like fractional services of like fractional head of people, head of culture, head of well-being, employee experience, you name it, everything people related. And then I host like workshops, either like I have a whole bunch of workshops set up, but then also like very like individual based on whatever the current challenges for the companies. Like I just interview like the contact person, and we'll figure out what they need, and based on that we create like a strategy or like workshop series and like content around it that's really focused on the human side. And then I do like a bunch of like retreats in like Europe, done one in Australia as well. And the States. So basically, I'd fly anywhere.
And then what about iConnect?
iConnect is basically connecting people offline. So it's a digital detox icebreaker game that's meant to get people off their screens, like away from technology, and connect in person through a series of like meaningful questions, and really getting to know each other, and like skip the small talk, and basically get more excited about connecting with real people instead of technology. And the last one is Symbiose. That's my latest baby. So we're actually proactively looking for pilot companies to test it. It's basically kind of an Airbnb experience for companies. So employees can create their own workshops based on their hidden talents, their like individual interests, and share them company-wide. So if you're a breathwork facilitator, if you're whatever interest in sustainability and want to share about it, you create a workshop, and then everyone who shares the same interest can join. But it's not based on departments. It's really dependent, like connecting based on mutual interests. Yeah.
So it's like co-created by the employees themselves.
Yes, exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, on that note, I just want to leave you with a minute to kind of gather some closing thoughts that you want to leave with everyone, and just take a moment to thank everyone here. Thank you to our audience, as we've been talking so much about connection and vulnerability, to show up and be here and take time out of your day and to ask the questions that we know many people online tuning in are wondering about. So thank you to our audience for being here and making for a very dynamic environment. And thank you to our technical partner, Tropical Nomad. As we've said, one way to connect when you are working in online environments is in places like Tropical Nomad. And without them, we wouldn't be here meeting every day. And so thank you so much for our team with all the audio and visual. And last but not least, Brother Rob over here. So for those of you who...
Thank you, Brother Rob.
Yeah, who may, I don't know if all of you are aware, but this is 5 years running now, every Monday, rain or shine, and was actually born from, one could say, you know, a sense of loneliness, isolation, connection, where people in Rob's personal network committed suicide. And Monday is the highest rate of suicide. So Rob created a space for all of us to come together, connect, inspire, challenge, learn, whether it's industry topics, personal journeys, and we do that every day. So without that, Rob, we wouldn't be here, and for allowing me to co-host and shine a spotlight on some people who are doing the work in connection. So thank you, Brother Rob. And with that, to my lovely guest, I think, you know, we came in here, I think, with a bit of a plan of what we wanted to talk about, and we're friends, and we talk all the time about, you know, connection, vulnerability, and then to just have you share so much about your personal mission and how that is actually showing up in companies, I think is so hopeful for those who are making that transition or questioning that transition of what workplace employment can look like and what to look for, you know, and the trends that are there, and now we know of running remote and all of this. So thank you so much for just being here, sharing your insights. We'll have the links for everyone, and most of all, I think leading by example. Like you're showing cultures and company employees what to look for, how to behave, and we are so fortunate. So thank you so much for being here and giving us some of your wisdom.
Thank you for having me.
So with that, any sort of final words for our audience that you want to leave with as you're on your mission?
So yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me. So it's like you both, but it's like, as I said, very purpose-driven, that I just want to reach as many people as I possibly can. And like speaking here at SpeakuP Monday actually allows me to share my message with everyone being here and like everyone watching online. So I hope if it like impacted just one person watching and like left like some spark and like action that they're gonna do something and connect deeper and like create happier workplaces, that was already so worth coming. So thank you for that. And also, like, the intention behind creating SpeakuP Monday to prevent people from, you know, not speaking up is actually really related to this loneliness and connection that I want to address. And yeah, connection is indeed like the number one indicator for living a happy life. So yeah, I think it's just super important to nourish that. Like, that is totally not work related, but like tell people you love them, like connect deeper, checking on your friends, and like make time for connections. And work is important, making money is important, but you cannot pay back that money or time that you didn't invest in like nurturing those quality connections. And you can have all the money in the world if you're not having a solid group of friends and like people you connect with from the heart around you. I don't think life is that meaningful. So that's on a personal note. And on a professional note, I just want to encourage everyone who's looking to go remote, that it's out there. Like, you don't have to be stuck in a toxic work environment. There are incredible remote cultures that really want you to be your best self at work and in life. So look out for that. You don't have to sacrifice the freedom to work from anywhere for the sense of belonging. And if you're interested in that, I'm very happy to send you a list of incredible company cultures. And any leader watching that, I just want to encourage you to, create happier and healthier teams from the inside out, because it comes back to you and like the performance of your company and bottom line as well. So my final thoughts.
Perfect. And with that, I think we want to say thank you to Nini and thank you to everyone here. And I think we're all going to walk away feeling a little bit more inspired and challenge the ways that we work and the things to look forward to. So thank you so much, Nini.
Thanks to the audience.